sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. When we look at the Dhamma, which the Lord Buddha taught, when we look at it, we see that the Dhamma is all about freedom from our expectations. Expectations that might be quite small or very big. Expectations from ourselves and expectations from those around us. Individuals, things around us, situations, relationships. The Dhamma is about forgiveness. It is freedom from disappointments. It is about forgiving the body, forgiving the mind, forgiving the mental habits, the thought patterns, the things that keep us awake at night. The things that, or the tendencies of the mind to, just like a whirlpool, to suck us in, to pull us in, when all we want is just to go about our business, our responsibilities of the day. So forgiving these mental tendencies, proliferations of the mind, proliferations of our mouth, the speech, the words that sometimes seem to have a life of their own. They just want to spew out of your lips. Forgiving those as well, forgiving the mouth. Forgiveness is about putting down the burden. And day by day I see how the true sense of security comes from the act of forgiving. Well, what happens when we are not forgiving? And that is all about abuse, self-abuse, abusing oneself. The longer we want to hold on to the pain, to the burden, in essence, torturing oneself, harming oneself, harming others. So the Dhamma is all about our life, our lives. It's about this moment and no other moment. It's about every moment that is lived. The Dhamma is about taking charge of one's life, remaining true to what needs to be done, while being and staying accountable to standards then might be in fact bigger than ourselves. So in essence we see how the Dhamma, and we especially in Buddhist circles or in meditation circles, we often forget that the Dhamma doesn't just mean the Buddha's teachings, it also means nature, natural, truth. Life. The truth of what is happening now inside of you. And when we look at the suttas, we see how the Buddha always is talking about what is happening now. He's not concerned about something that could be happening somewhere else. I mean, yes, inferences are made here and there, but in essence he was always talking and addressing the issues that pertain to that moment, the questioner, the individual circumstances that are presented. So, and the same goes for his students when they were addressing issues raised by listeners, and those who came to them with questions about life, about their own lives. And that's one of the reasons why the Buddha would always avoid questions on philosophy. The 10 questions being the most notable ones, where he specifically refused to answer 10 specific questions about, metaphysics and things like that. Things that he deemed as being totally irrelevant to what was happening to the individual at that moment or in their lives, irrespective of the questions being raised by the intellect. His efforts were always about how to retrieve one's own humanity from the noise that remain irrelevant to the truth of what is happening now, the Dhamma of that moment. And to me, that is one of the biggest reasons why the Dhamma is called Sanditthiko. It's immediately effective. It's akaliko, it's timeless. Just like your life. Our lives that we are living right now, where each of us to some extent think that this is the only relevant thing that is happening, and it's so unique that it cannot be repeated, it cannot be happening somewhere else. It's so genuinely ours. And therefore, what I'm feeling at this moment is isolated. The wounds that I am carrying are justifiable. The burdens I'm carrying are completely legitimate. And therefore, forgiveness should not be happening. In this case, at this moment in time. Meanwhile, the self-abuse continues. Understanding there is dukkha, understanding there is suffering, is understanding that there is a lack in forgiveness in the person. And it's not about just dukkha. The Dhamma is not, the Buddha's teachings are not about dukkha only. It's only one part. The other part is the freedom from dukkha, is the healing, is the ointment, is the remedy, is the antidote to dukkha, which is the freedom, the forgiveness towards ourselves. First and foremost, we forgive ourselves, everything else is forgiven. And the mind suddenly becomes lighter. The pain suddenly is reduced tremendously and sometimes completely gone. Even our steps that we take, we become light-footed. So when I recommend to students, people around me, meditators and non-meditators alike, to smile, that is the message. Because when you're smiling, you're declaring to yourself and to the world that, albeit temporarily, you're putting down the burden. The self-abuse is going to be suspended, for a little while at least. And the more we come back to that sense of lightness, due to the forgiveness, the more we can establish a new form of habits in the mind, where that could become the new tendency of the mind. After all, there are these things called positive habits as well. The enlightened person is habitually doing what is wholesome, versus having done what was habitually unwholesome. Sometimes when people come to me asking about like metaphysical questions on the Dhamma, trying to find meaning behind all these other things that are separate from themselves and their living existential, experiential life, and you give them a tool that they could apply, something so tangible, many of them walk away feeling disappointed because they were expecting something extravagant, something so bombastic, something so outrageous, something so flamboyant. And then I understand how some monks, even at the time of the Buddha, were disappointed in him. One of them being Malunkyaputta, the monk who vowed to be leaving the Buddha, and to leave the Buddha, if he were not to complete his expectations of him, to answer some of his metaphysical questions, and also to show him some miraculous feats, which in his mind were the reasons why he became a bhikkhu in the first place. And it's an interesting, whimsical conversation where the Buddha asks him, well, have I promised you that I will do all these miraculous feats for you so that you could become my, one of my bhikkhus? And he says, he admits, no, you haven't. And he says, then why are you, in a sense, threatening me or giving me the ultimatum? So I find that to be interesting, especially in this day and age, where the simple seems to be banal, something not so relevant to life. So I will stop here and open to questions and comments, thoughts, critiques. About the practice or anything that I tried sharing. Yes?
Yeah, thank you, Bhante. I just want to say thank you for that, because it was a lovely talk. It was very it's just nice, isn't it, to keep like refreshing the mind with these things, because they're so important. To just remember the little times like forgiveness, and just to remember to keep putting the Dharma first, the Dharma in yourself first as well, actually. So, but yeah, thank you for that.
Can I just quickly ask a question then? So forgiveness does not eliminate remorse, because one would think that forgiving. Oops, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking that, does forgiving oneself involve also getting rid of remorse, or is it like two separate things? Like forgiving oneself can still mean that one should feel remorseful for anything that one has done.
Well, forgiving oneself is already letting down the burden, like I was referring to earlier. Remorse is a continuation of that constant, annoying, nagging humming that goes on in the mind that seems inescapable, and it haunts us. That's the sense of remorse, which does not allow the person to become free of it. And that is what is necessary for the person, like, shall we say, Angulimala, who had killed 999 individuals. If the numbers are correct, even if it's like 1/10 of that number, it's pretty huge. And he would have the sense of remorse, despite the fact that he was a Sotapanna, at least in the beginning part of his encounter with the Buddha. And the Buddha would encourage him to persevere through that, but not carry that burden continuously with him, because that would hinder his progress. That's why remorse is very poisonous for the mind. So I think it's like a muscle. One needs to apply forgiveness again and again, however often that one needs to kind of reduce the intensity of the poisonous influence of remorse within oneself and the mind. Because I say it's like poison is because it is very pervasive, and it will always be clouding every single wholesome thing that one does. It's like a slap in the face constantly, and one is doing that self-abuse to oneself. So the person might be even going into the earlier jhanas, let's say, and suddenly there's the negative talk. Oh, do you remember what we did to that person? All of a sudden the person comes out of the first jhana, so they never get to go deeper. So they're pulled out from the sense of tranquility of the mind, because of the images that are still locked in, and they're still playing in the projection screen of one's mind. However, terrible things that they might have done, or even small ones, but it's very much nagging. So remorse is very pervasive in that sense. It's a very negative. And forgiveness is like an ointment. Is like it says, okay, we've done it. Yes. And this is one of the reasons why I always encourage students to acknowledge the fact that they've broken a precept, shall we say, and say to themselves, okay, I did it. I said this lie. Okay, I told this lie. Fine. How do I feel about it? Well, I feel bad. I feel horrible. Okay. Am I going to do it again? If I am presented with the same situation again, would I do it again? And this is when they need to be very honest and truthful with oneself. And they say, I won't do it again. I won't do it again. Okay, at that point, just drop everything and retake all the 5 precepts. So it's like starting with a clean slate. starting with a clean slate. Obviously, if the person has gone and killed someone, we're talking about something totally different now. There's repercussions. Because the Buddha always insisted that the Dhamma works in conjunction with the law of the land. That's why it never gets in trouble, in a sense, with the legal system, because it has to function under the umbrella of whatever society it is found in. So that is even as a bhikkhu, when we are ordaining as bhikkhus, rather, and taking the higher ordination, we're asked by our preceptors, are you running away from the law? Have you done any, have you killed someone? So we have to say those things, and the ceremony will not proceed if it's in the affirmative, if the answer is yes, I've done it. I'm running away from the law. So we are accountable for our actions. Because sometimes there were people who were running from the law in the initial days of the sasana, and complaints were made by the kings of the time, such as King Pasenadi of Kosala, and the Buddha had to institute certain laws to protect the Sangha, while at the same time preserving the legal sovereigns, I guess, the executive power, in this case King Pasenadi, the royal entities of that time in that culture in India. So I hope I'm able to answer your question satisfactorily.
So would you say both guilt and remorse are like useless emotions? Like one should not allow those to...
Learn from them, I would say, is the first step.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise it can turn into a negative pattern. But then there are people who indulge in these emotions.
Mm-hmm.
If a person who is very much abusive, self-abusive, they indulge in these emotions. In fact, as they're walking and they say hi to someone and they don't respond, all of a sudden they feel guilty, for example. And guess what? That becomes like a chewing gum in the mind that's playing again and again and again throughout the day. And you remove that chewing gum somehow, and they feel guilty that they're feeling okay. Something is wrong because they're not feeling remorse. Why? Because that is the MO, that's modus operandi for the individual. So it's very toxic. So in that sense, yes, I agree with you that it's useless, but it's also harmful. Because the person is never confronted. Okay, what am I doing to my mind? So there is a need for the person to have this honest discussion within oneself. And I've had students who would come and they reach that point of tranquility and they feel guilty. They feel unworthy to even be in the first, second jhana. It's like, what's happening to me? I'm supposed to feel pain in order for me to feel good. They're not saying that at the end, but after a few questions you can find out that that's what's happening.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Bhante, can I have one question?
Of course.
This was Lilith. I will try to formulate it in a better way, because I was thinking about it some time ago about the forgiveness. Thank you for addressing this very important thing. And about that, sometimes there are some people in our lives with whom we had very good relationship, and in the course of a time, something changed. And not to say we become enemies, but we become people who are not trusting each other. And there comes this forgiveness. Sometimes usually I try to forgive people, any person, because I understand that it is very bad for me, for myself, and it just killing the good energy within myself. But sometimes I see the traps of the mind when it takes you to the place where you are indifferent. And I can feel that it is not forgiveness, but it somehow becomes more peaceful within yourself. But I can check it when I want to feel the same thing, like the same kindness and the same good feelings that I had before, and something within just stopped me. I don't know what is this. I would like. I understand that it's a very specific question, but maybe you understand what I'm talking about. I want to understand what is this blocking. This is not a very good thing, I understand, but I don't know how to overcome this trap. Because in the course of the time, sometimes it just passed away by itself. But there are some situations where I feel that I need to work on this thing. It won't go away by itself. For example, if you don't see the person, that's okay. But if you see that particular person or have some contact with him or her, you can see that, no, it is there. This blocking thing is there. Thank you.
Suppressing. It's almost like a temporary eraser that you're using over something you've written, or covering it up is another way of describing the way I see, the way I understand from your question. And it's a temporary relief. It's redirecting your attention. It's almost like subterfuge. It's like avoiding, evading the painful thing that is in front of you, or within you in this case, the painful sensations that you've experienced because of this encounter, this situation with this person. And yes, there's a part of your brain that says, I want to go back to the way things were. You know, sometimes you see this in partners. When they discover one of them has cheated or has done something, or they discover something about the other person that they never thought would even be the case. And suddenly they find out. And yes, they're resentful, they're hateful, there's all that energy, negative energy, but at the same time there's this desire within them to go back to the time prior to that discovery. There's that longing. There's that attachment to want things to be a certain way. Well, sometimes these things happen to help us to grow. Not necessarily just as partners, and using that example, but grow most importantly within oneself, within ourselves. And oftentimes life has some difficult pills to give us, difficult lessons to learn from, which part of the brain might block. Part of the brain, this is one of the circumstances I'm referring to, obviously, where it says, I don't want it, I don't want to hear it, get it out of here, I want to go back to the way things were. You probably have had many such moments when transitioning from childhood to teenage years, for example, when so many ideas and thoughts about real life kind of were shattered as you're crossing these major milestones in life. And it's almost like discovering that there's no Santa Claus. You know? And sometimes people just get, oh no, I want to go back to that. So it's like a painful, naughty situation with someone else can sometimes be a reason for us to not just be unforgiving towards them, but towards life in general. So this is one of the circumstances. Another one would be something like you were saying, I was referring to rather, the suppression. The suppression is like, in life sometimes can help you not to see that person. You get a different job, you don't see this colleague, I'm presuming it's a colleague, and you think, wow, I've forgiven them. And then somebody mentions their name, and all of a sudden you might not even feel the rage towards them, but all of a sudden the way you eat your food in the staff room, for example, all of a sudden you're getting your meal with the spoon or fork with a little bit more intensity. You're turning your key in your doorknob with a little bit more force. A mindful person would say, okay, what's going on? Why am I so enraged? And that's why we need to retrace the steps and see, and then we find out that we were actually suppressing it. Because we have so much hatred and so much sense of guilt that we are feeling this. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And that's the reason why I always stress the importance of being honest. Have I really forgiven this person? Or was I under pressure to really forgive them quickly? Because sometimes, depending on the wound that one has received because of this interaction, sometimes it needs some time. Sometimes it needs a little bit more time. The person might not have reached that state of maturity where they could actually quickly, the mind quickly sees it and lets go. In Buddhism we have that term, adana patinisagga. I mentioned it several times in the past, where it is the picking up only to give up. Picking up only to give up. So there isn't this upadana, which is the clinging part. Taking up, clinging, and then maybe letting go. Usually we are in the upadana state. We don't like to let go. Especially something as festering, as sticky, as disgusting as guilt. So we get fascinated by it. We want to hold on to it. So this is a tough question, I have to admit. There's no ifs and buts about it, but I start with honesty. I start with truthfulness. That's one of the reasons why I recommend journaling, because it is a self-discovery process. As you're writing, all of a sudden you're going to have some aha moments. All of a sudden you're going to go, oh, I never thought about that. I never thought about this part of my contribution to the guilt. I was actually calling it forgiveness, but maybe I was doing it differently. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to add about this journaling that I changed the way I'm journaling this thing. Before that, I was just writing my thoughts. I decided to write whatever I would like to say to this person.
Oh.
I would say it is in any words, you know. Trying not to be very rude, but whatever I feel, whatever I think, like in a way that it seems that you are talking to this person, and I would say it helps a lot. The only thing I found out this clinging part, and the sad moment there with this clinging was that after that journaling, even with one time journaling, it helps to forgive, but mind starts to remember all the pleasant moments and start to cling this. And this is the part that I don't know what to do with. Maybe again journaling.
Clinging to the pleasant part? Were you referring?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Do you cling to those pages that you wrote?
No.
Okay.
No. I forget what I wrote.
Okay.
But whenever I write all these rude parts that I wanted to say, but I didn't have, I don't want to say it in person, because I know that this should be very rude. And but afterwards, as far as these are the person, this is a person with whom I have very good relationship, so very deep trustful relationship. So it's a very important relationship for me, and there are very, very good moments also. So my mind starts to cling these parts and not to let go, you know, with this thing. This is a trap, this trap that I have. And the same with metta meditation. It again ruins the metta meditation for me, just because of that part.
That's a big part. That's a big part. Ultimately, all these things are lessons to hone your skills, to sharpen the arrow. And it's not about the other person. It's what we're doing with the results of these interactions. Because the thing that you're referring to perhaps happened once, or it's in the past, you know, some time ago, but we're regurgitating it. We're still playing, you know, the different variables in our heads. What ifs? What you know? How could they? Da 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 da. Meanwhile, you're sacrificing your present moment for the sake of what happened, or your version of what happened, by the way. If we go and knock on this person's door, ask them, they might give us a totally different version. There's always that possibility. Now, where does that leave us with the reliability of our thinking and deductions and conclusions about this situation? Either way, they're not happening now. It's done. So forgiveness, if anything, when I was suggesting drop the burden, forgiveness is about putting down the burden. It's putting down the burden means you're coming back to this moment, the genuineness of what is happening now, which, so long as we are feeling guilty, remorse, dwelling on the past, means one thing: you're not living the Dhamma. You're living in your head. Has nothing to do with reality. Dhamma is reality. Now, that takes tremendous trust from the part of the person. Now, is it then ignoring what I'm feeling about what happened? No. That's where the journaling part comes in. And if you want to write those things, you know, I recommend you do that, and just, in fact, in your mind, mail it to them. Write it as a letter. You know, don't put their address. Put it in an envelope, seal it, okay? Put it in a drawer. Or throw it in the trash can. Imagine that it's the mailbox or post. At least you're actually letting go. You're giving up. Not in a figurative way, but in actuality, you're giving up something that encapsulates all that hurt, all that burning in your heart. Sometimes the eyes need to see that. But ultimately, I don't recommend dwelling there. Do the activity with the physical body that's necessary, because the mind needs to see that. And then come back to the moment, okay, so that you can really go back into the metta on a deep level. It's like, okay, I've done that. Just be quiet. Let me come back to my metta. Because life is not about me dwelling on the guilt or remorse. It's just an interaction. It's just a nuisance. Come back to this. Because what if these 5 minutes of your life are the last 5 minutes of your life? Would it matter that this person stepped on your toe or said something? Does it matter? Ultimately, if you had only these 5 minutes. So sometimes I say that to myself, or I say to patients, or they put you in this in this machine, and they shoot you out of the atmosphere, away from Earth. And all of a sudden you see Earth getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it's a dot. Does it matter at that point? Oh, this person has harmed me, betrayed me, cheated on me. Does it matter at that point when you're all by yourself in the coldness of space and there's no one around you? So playing these games with the mind, all of a sudden you're training your mind to kind of loosen up its grip from these very otherwise important moments of your life. I mean, you place to be important in your mind, in your life, that are like this boulder, this huge rock that does not allow you to move forward. And many of us have these huge boulders and we're not able to proceed beyond. I appreciate the question because so many students of meditation have such boulders, sometimes plural. So it's an effort. It's an efforting. It's a doing. And it's constantly understanding the mind, the nuances of the mind. That's why I don't believe in just like, okay, you get at this stage, nothing will bother you anymore. There's no such thing. Because if they're there, they will pop their ugly heads. And the more subtle the states that you're developing into in meditation. I was mentioning this to someone not too long ago. It's like driving a Ferrari on a course. You're going at 200 miles or 275 kilometers an hour, and the tiniest little pebble on the road, you going over it can just throw you and crash you. So these guilty things, even though you might think that you resolved them, they're good to go, suddenly they come up in a subtle way because they've been suppressed deep in the mind. And that's why the mind is such a powerful tool. It can work for you and it can work against you. But the mindful attitude with wisdom, sati and sampajanya working together will reveal, they will put the spotlight on these different activities of the mind, and you'll go, ah, that's a true aha moment for me. So I hope this is helping you.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thanks.
Yes? Chitta?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Bhante. I'm just so, am I understanding this correctly? Because obviously, like, there's other teachers teaching a little bit of a different way when it comes to forgiveness. So are you just basically saying to just like work with a level of like opening up and accepting what's happened and then going back into loving kindness. Is that what you're like advocating here, or am I sort of like misinterpreting your, because I'm not really sure what you're saying is the process of forgiveness, you say. So
there is a mechanism, there's a formula underlying all the different nuances that which are individual based. For you it might be different processing, but what I'm advocating for is an organic approach. I will not ever say to a student like a one-size-fits-all. I will never give a direction. It's like, just do this to everyone. That's a harmful instruction, actually, because your experiences in life have nothing to do with someone else in this room, anyone else in the world, actually. So I have to listen to the different variations of your situation, but obviously there is a common theme. And so before I have you go back to metta, I need you to really settle down, just like you grab hold of a cup full of muddy water. I need you to put the cup down so that time and understanding will allow these to separate the water from the mud, the gravel, whatever. And in that process there will be many gems of understanding of how your brain functions in justifying your words, your actions, your motives, which sometimes they are led by none other than anger, aversion, lust, attachment, and definitely delusion. Now, what I see sometimes people do, just forgive. Okay, without having gone over these nuances and understand clarifications for oneself, to take one back to metta is just a ticking time bomb. Because all of a sudden the person comes back with other issues. Well, that's another form of suppression. Because the person is simply after gaining some jhanic states or some good feelings, the tiny little gifts that come to us. And that's the intentionality behind going back to metta. I want to go back to the feel-good sensations. I don't want to waste time doing the forgiveness part. So forgiveness has everything to do with understanding. That's why I stress the importance of bringing in mindfulness with wisdom, discernment. Because if the faster or the more we understand that step, suddenly metta becomes like, being on a jet, just whizzing straight into the deeper states of the mind. Because the other issues will not come back anymore, because you've done your homework. The mind will come and throw some things at you from the past. All of a sudden you're like, yeah. And this is why, gone. I'm not talking about like, vitakka, vichara here, thinking and pondering. But just intuitively you'll understand what is taking place without being sucked into the narrative with the what-ifs. So there is that extra responsibility that we need to have, instead of just following, I'll do that, and then go back to metta. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it definitely. Like, as soon as you said the word organic, I mean that was all I needed to hear anyway. It was perfect. Thank you.
I'm sorry I wasted your time.
Far from it. but it's a good way of learning again to trust your own intuition, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
And then that is the very important the word, the experience you described, you mentioned, intuition. Ultimately, it's very personal. This path is extremely personal. I was mentioning this to someone in reference to getting acknowledgement from of your attainments, of the person's attainments or experiences from someone else. even if it's the Buddha, even if it's one's teacher. To me, that's redundant. It needs to come from within you. And that is where intuitive awareness of it comes in. And the more you're developing the understanding of knowing that language of your heart, shall we say, by the time you reach some of those other subtler and subtler states, you really don't have to ask anybody. You know, many of the bhikkhus, the students of Lord Buddha, they didn't go knock on his door and say, Bhante, sorry, didn't mean to wake you up, but what do you think this is? I mean, if the conversation came up, I'm sure, but it's a very personal process of discovery and understanding. Discovery and understanding go hand in hand, and intuition is the ground for both, the way I'm discovering it every day. So, and it's definitely personal.
Thank you.
Bhante, I think Russell has been having a question.
Oh.
I saw your hand, Russell.
Oh, no, it's just a technical question, if I may.
Of course.
Thank you. Welcome back. Recently, I was a bit ill, and, I've recovered. And I was trying to analyze, maybe I shouldn't, I was trying to analyze, is this, the illness is a consequence of, the Buddhist thing about recognizing old age, mortality, sickness, and so forth. So that's a natural thing. Or is it a result of bad habits? Myself versus the environment, or so forth? Or is it a result of karma that, and a multitude of kind of, negative things that I might have done earlier in life, say 50 years ago or whatever. And then I thought, well, maybe it's actually just a combination of all three factors. The natural progression of health to sickness to death, karmic vengeance or karmic, consequences, and unwise, living habits or environmental habits. It's sort of a technical question, I guess, but still, I was just curious how to analyze these things when you encounter, whether it's yourself, it's happening to yourself, or to other people around you. Yeah, that's my question.
I think you already answered it somehow, if not completely. It's. I would say it's a combination of all those factors, and sometimes the question itself says something. Like, okay, I'm trying to find an easy, quick, satisfying response so that I can make sense of it and move on or justify what's happening to me. A similar question was raised to the Buddha by a man who came and in a very upset way, he asked, like, why do we suffer? Why do we have old age? Why do we experience death? And the Buddha just calmly asked him this very simple question. Were you born? And the man looked at the Buddha and was like, well, duh, of course. And the Buddha goes, well, that's your problem. Don't get born. So, but I don't want to trivialize the states that a human being goes through in encountering physical ailments and pain and I'm thankful that you recovered and you're back with us. You're sitting and you're asking me very important questions like these. However, there's people who go and never come back. Go to the hospital or you know what I'm saying. But these questions, I find them also valuable, I have to say, because they realign the mind to what is more important. I mean, the Buddha was not shrugging off this person's concerns, of course, but he was trying to bring him back to what it is, the crux of the matter, the main issue. And hopefully the person would muster up enough courage to actually process that and work towards having less craving that would drag him to another life. Because, I think I've mentioned to you one time when I asked my father, when he had all these tubes in his body, in his neck, and he was in the hospital, suffering for over a year and a half. And I asked him the same question that I had asked him when he didn't have those tubes in him, when he was in the comfort of his home, still old. He was in his 70s, but now he was almost turning 81. And I asked him, Dad, if by some magical means I were to give you this body, my body, much younger than yours, of course. And he actually had a glimmer in his eyes. You can see the sparkle and the slight curvature of his lips, of like, if only. Well, that tells me that he hadn't learned much. The craving was still alive and kicking in him. That means that he's still going to be in samsara, in the cycle. Why? Because he's not satisfied with life, having seen whatever he had seen. And my dad had lived quite well. So that is the issue. So I think treating your question with the utmost care and consideration and love and depth of analysis is necessary in order for you to really penetrate deep enough to see what your relationship, or whether your relationship to craving, for example, might have changed or is changing. Because the Buddha's emphasis is always on cut yourself from this cycle of samsara. Sooner or later we're going to have to do it. Might as well do it sooner. And the sooner we do that, the less rebirth scenarios, pain and dukkha we are to encounter. This is not life negating, not by any means. It is understanding the futility of pursuing the object of the six senses. But the person, this is a personal, like I've said many times, like today too, it's a personal journey that one has to discover and reach that epiphany moment of like, okay, I've had enough, thank you. Time for me to start cutting this cord, this thing called craving. So that's what I would offer.
No, thank you. Yeah, because, this is sort of just to, kind of make a joke, not to make a joke about it, but to introduce a little light. Sometimes I think, like when I'm pickling cucumbers or vegetables, I think, well, my craving is to, preserve this cucumber, so I'm gonna pickle it. And so if I have a craving to preserve my body, or then, if I could pickle myself in a jar and add, some spices like coriander, vinegar, and how long could it last as a pickled, it's sort of like in biology class where you have pickled, pickled parts of animals or whatever, So, my craving is somewhat akin to desire to pickle vegetables or that kind of thing. I'm sure a lot of people pickle things or make preservatives? Is that what they call it? and in jars, in glass jars. So that's about the level of my craving. It's like pickling stuff, But anyway, no. Thank you for your
of course,
your insight. Thank you.
Sure. My question then becomes: haven't we been pickled enough? See, that's what's necessary. I think I've been pickled enough. That's the statement that one has to make for oneself. But it's a very personal thing, and the Buddha never actually forced anyone to become awakened, or to ask that question of themselves. The person has to come to that, and that's why the first noble truth requires tremendous level of alertness and awareness and wisdom to appreciate dukkha, to appreciate suffering. Understanding, that's what we mean by the truth of the first noble truth. It's not suffering. Suffering is not noble, but it's the understanding and appreciation of it, which is very personal and necessary for the journey to really get going. So thank you for the question, Russell, as usual. All right, so if you have further questions, you can, of course, email me and I'll address them. I'll do my best to get back as soon as possible in response to those emails. And apologies for the noise in the background. So I'm sitting in a backyard. Neighbors' dogs. So let's do some sharing of merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired, for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you for being here, all of you, and I'll see you next week. And thank you for the newcomers in joining us from around the world. Lovely to see you, and may your smiles never leave your hearts and your faces. Stay safe.
Thank you.
See you next week.